As students everywhere head back to school, now more than ever, particularly in light of the recent IPCC Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report, educators everywhere are now wondering how they can include what many view as the most important issue of our time into their lesson plans and into the learning of students each and every day. While resources do exist, educators know better than anyone else that incorporating effective engagement with climate change and climate solutions can feel like a daunting task. Where do you even start? What do you do? Other questions arise. Like, do students care? What motivates them to care when they do care? Is there something that they can do to reach drawdown now, today, and how can they do it? What do students want and need from educators? And what's the world that they want to see and build if they even have a vision for it? I'm Matt Scott, leading storytelling at Project Drawdown, and today, as part of our first Project Drawdown Dialogue, our theme is Back to School. I'm having conversations with three young people, Jocelyn, Harita, and Taylor, all connected with the School of Environmental Leadership in Marin County, just northwest of San Francisco. SEL is a school within a school located within a comprehensive public high school, and it's really focused on providing a project-based, environmentally centered program that emphasizes development in leadership and 21st century skills. So all things we want for young people and for all of us really when it comes to climate change and beyond. Today, you'll hear from students who are already working to reach drawdown and proving that as students head back to school, there's not only a chance for them to learn, but to take action to help the world reach drawdown as quickly, as safely, and as equitably as possible. But now I really want to dive into a conversation with none other than Harita, a high school student beginning work on LED lighting as a climate solution, and also even more thinking about the co-benefits of climate solutions like jobs and the economy. How do we get young people to really understand the importance and the bigger impact, and even more, what's already interesting and appealing to young people when it comes to climate solutions? Where do they want to plug in? Now, my conversation with Harita.
My name is Harita Kalvai. I am an incoming junior at the Marin School of Environmental Leadership, and I am part of an organization called Citizens Climate Lobby, where we are focusing on a carbon fee bill which will help us reach net zero faster. So I'm focused on more of the economic benefits of climate policy than the scientific benefits, which I still think is important because at this point in time, we have everything that we need scientifically to make the world more sustainable, and it's all up to politicians to actually implement changes.
Yeah, one thing I think is so powerful about that is just that you have this view of climate solutions, which we want more people to have, which is that it's not just about the science and it's not just about like carbon and addressing that in the atmosphere, but it's also about like the economy and these other benefits, which we call co-benefits. Like, I'm so curious to know though, when did you first become interested in climate change and global warming?
I think I've always been very passionate about global warming and ending global warming. I've been like a vegetarian since I was a little kid. Like, I was always very environmentally conscious, or I tried to be as much as possible. But I feel like the big turning point for me was seeing the wildfires in the Bay Area, knowing people who lost their homes in wildfires and like knowing how much climate change impacted those. And I think it was the first time that like I began to see global warming as an issue that actually affected us now, rather than just like some doomsday thing that was going to affect us later on.
Yeah. When was it that you, like, as you talk about that, obviously the wildfires are something that you had to deal with. I know being in the Bay Area, for example, that that was something that was unavoidable, really. I think of wildfires at different points. Even now, we still deal with these things. And as we know, those impacts of climate change are only intensifying. But at what point did you realize you could do something about it? And I ask that question because so often, I think, especially with young people, like young people are not necessarily included in the conversation, but definitely are not seen as the source of solutions.
I admit that at first I didn't think I could really do anything. I was in middle school and I didn't see any places for me to get involved, and even the youth organizations were organizations that I was still too young to join. So I would say that I realized that I could start getting involved in high school. I go to a high school where I learn about environmental issues and how to act on them. So that was the first thing. And then within that high school, I started getting opportunities to be parts of different organizations, and that's how I joined CCL. And that's how I realized that I did really have an impact on what could happen.
What are your friends and others, if anything, saying about climate change or thinking about climate change and climate solutions?
I'm fortunate to be surrounded by people who very much do believe in climate change and do believe in coming up with climate solutions. However, I have met and talked to people before who are climate skeptics. It is something that I have to do a lot, and that can be very difficult sometimes. But I would say that most of the time people are very open to doing things that will environmentally positively impact our society.
Yeah, I would love to kind of dive in though and talk more about like some of those really real things that you're doing and that you've done to work on climate solutions. And I understand that like in general you mentioned your work with CCL, but I also know that you've worked with LED opportunity, working on LED lighting. And so could you just talk more about that specifically and what that's entailed for you? Because whether it's LED lighting or another climate solution, again, a lot of times, like young people, especially, and people in general, are not told that they could do something and actually make an impact. But like, what has that work entailed for you, just addressing like incandescent lighting and shifting things to LED lighting?
Well, that is a new project, so I don't have a lot of information on it right now. But what I can tell you is that the goal is to shift getting LED lights for something that will impact you sustainably and start to shift it towards something that will impact you economically. Because a lot of people are worried about how switching to LED lights might impact them financially. But the truth is, because they're using so much less energy, you are actually saving a lot of money in the long run. And so the purpose of the project is to show people that switching to a more sustainable source is also economically friendly as opposed to just environmentally friendly.
It's exciting to see the seeds of the project. And thank you for even just giving the context of why it's important, because I think that addresses one of the misconceptions that people often have. This reality that, like, yes, to shift or to do any kind of work, so to embrace jobs or to shift to technologies that are more environmentally friendly, like LED lighting, yes, there are costs, but like in the long run, especially, those costs pay for themselves. It's absolutely worth it to shift to those more like environmentally friendly practices and technologies. But I think that just your work is really interesting to me because it also points out that like we have so many ways that people can plug in and make a difference. I've been thinking a lot recently about schools in particular, just because this is back to school season. And I know that you're in the School of Environmental Leadership, so you think a lot, or you're surrounded by people who are thinking a lot about the climate and the environment and about ways to reach drawdown. But I would love to learn more from you just about like any ways that you think that schools can be better.
In terms of what schools can improve on, I'm fortunate enough to receive a curriculum where I'm looking at world issues all the time and I'm learning so much about environmental science and policy. And I feel like that shouldn't just be something that a select few people get. I feel like everybody should be learning about how to put world issues in perspective and look at them in a certain way. and also learn how to come up with solutions to fix them. So that would be the first thing. A project that I've worked on, last year I worked with the local transit agency in my area, and we focused on getting more people to use public transit. And because it was during the peak of COVID at that time, not a lot of people really wanted to use public transit because they didn't think it was safe. And using it could be kind of difficult too because ridership numbers were limited, so only a few people were allowed on each bus. And when I looked at all the data, I realized that sometimes people couldn't get on certain buses that they wanted to because they were already filled up by the time they got to their stop. So they would have to wait a long time before they could even get on a bus. So my project, it was a group project. We wanted to showcase it as something that was both convenient, as well as cheap and sustainable.
Like, if there's any piece of advice that you have for people or something that you wish more people knew about when it comes to climate solutions, is there anything that comes to mind?
I would say that environmentalism is a huge scope, and there's always something in it for everyone. So whether you're somebody who likes to look at the more scientific things or somebody who likes to look at more of the economic things, there's always a way for you to get involved. Like, even if you're super artistic, there's still ways for you to get involved sustainability-wise. And it's not like this little niche thing, you know? There are so many ways to be more sustainable, and every single practice has a way for a person to be more sustainable. So you don't have to be a certain type of person to get into this work. You just need to find a way to integrate it into things that you already like.
Yeah, you mentioned like being artistic, for example, and I know that you're someone who's passionate about poetry as an example. Like, are there any ways that your passion for poetry relates to your other passions for obviously the environment and the climate, our climate, but also social justice? Do you see where those things overlap in any way or how they relate?
Yeah, because I think poetry is like one of those mediums that you can use so well to talk about the way that you want to see things change. Poetry is a huge writing style, but poetry in general is just one of those things where you can really turn the words that you have into these opinions and these like even open-ended opinions where you can get somebody to really think about things. And so within social justice and even environmentalism, I have used poetry to my advantage. I hosted a poetry and environmentalism event back in January. It was a webinar, and I had all of these different teenagers come in and share their poetry about environmental issues. A lot of them talked about the wildfires, a lot of them talked about air quality, and it was really eye-opening because it was just so impactful to hear directly what people thought and just hear people's like raw opinions and thoughts on things.
Yeah, and it's interesting because what you're saying even reminds me of something else that schools and educators, whether it's like educators who are actually in formal education systems or people who are just educating others in their community, it reminds me that they can really tap into the power of storytelling, tap into the power of communicating in a way that's different, that's more accessible for people. Like, how do you want to help the world reach drawdown?
I would say that in the future, I really want to go into politics. And I think that that connects to the way that I want to reach drawdown because I want people to realize that environmental issues are something that can be totally affected by policy. Mm-hmm. And if we change policies and if we make things better that way, things will become better environmentally as well.
Any final words of wisdom or advice that you want to share with people?
Yeah, no matter how old you are, you can always get involved. Even if you feel like you're too young or too old, you're not. So just go out there and do it.
Thank you so much, Harita, for for that perspective and for your insight. And if there's anything that I really walk away from that conversation with, it's this realization that it's really easy to feel helpless and hopeless when it comes to climate change and global warming. And that's why I'm so proud of our work at Project Drawdown, because it really helps us tell the other half of the story, not just the crisis and the problems, which are important to know and understand, but also the solutions and the hope that comes with those solutions, the opportunity that comes with those solutions, the collaborations that come with those solutions. These are all realities and not something that young people have always felt like it's theirs to engage in. Are you wondering how to get young people to find their focus within the climate solutions world? You'll hear from Jocelyn, a current college sophomore with a passion for civil engineering and transportation, about how she found her focus area within the mosaic of solutions.
Hello, my name is Jocelyn Tai, and currently I am a sophomore at USC, which is the University of Southern California. I'm studying mechanical engineering with an interest in applying what I'm learning towards sustainability and just helping the environment and people in general. Yeah, in high school, I think that's kind of where I developed an interest in sustainability because I was part of an environmental leadership program, which I'm sure I'll talk about later on, but that was definitely very impactful in helping me decide what I wanted to do with my life and seeing how I, as a student, can help the community. So I think that was really helpful for me to discover that I could participate in the community at such a young age.
Yeah, and that's one thing that I think is so powerful and important, even just about this dialogue, because a lot of people in leadership positions especially don't necessarily think of young people as the source of solutions or as being a part of contributing. But something kind of where I want to go back to, I guess, is like where your climate change journey started. When was the first time that you really found yourself thinking about climate change and about climate solutions?
So I have this really distinct memory from when I was a child. I used to live in the East Bay of California, and then we would take the Richmond Bridge to go drive to other places. That was a pretty popular transportation path. And I just remember looking out the car window and seeing all the factories and all the pollution that was coming out of it. And at a young age, I didn't really understand what that was doing to the environment. But I knew that when I looked at it, I was like, oh, this does not feel right. This is not a natural thing that should be going into the air. And thinking about it, I'm like, oh, I don't want to breathe that in. And I don't think anyone else would want to. So that is a childhood memory that kind of got me thinking about how humans are impacting the environment, and it sparked something in me. And I was like, oh, I want to do something to help prevent that.
Yeah, one of the things that you referenced earlier that I think is interesting is that just a lot of the time, younger people are not seen as the people who are able to show up and make a difference. What was it that ultimately showed you that you could make an impact and that you could do something?
Yeah, definitely the high school program that I was in. Well, it was called the Marin School of Environmental Leadership, and they emphasized developing collaboration, communication, leadership skills, all while connecting that back to the environment. So we started out feet running. Freshman year, we took on many different projects. So my first project was creating a campaign that promoted electric vehicles, and it was very hands-on. We created a promotional video, and we went to neighboring high schools to give presentations about the benefits of electric vehicles. And through that, because it was an interactive experience and I was there physically in the classroom presenting, I could see how this information was creating emotions in the audience. Like when we told them about all the different benefits, they were really surprised and happy, I'd say, because they were able to learn this type of information. So that was one of my first experiences of doing hands-on environmental advocacy. And through that, I really was like, oh, wow, I'm just a freshman in high school, but we can already do these sort of campaigns and we're already impacting people. So that really just motivated me to continue doing that.
Yeah. One of the big things that's interesting about that is that you mentioned focusing on transportation, and when it comes to climate change and global warming, it could feel really overwhelming. So there are so many different things that we can do. Like even within Project Drawdown, there are 80 plus climate solutions that we really focus on and talk about, but those fall within 10 different sectors or 10 different areas, including transportation. So like, how did you end up focusing on transportation and the work that you were doing?
I always was interested in transportation because that is something that's a part of everyone's life. Like you have to drive or walk somewhere to get to another place. You don't just spend your whole life in one room. So transportation is an essential part of everyone's lives. And because of that, if you integrate sustainability into that, you would be able to integrate sustainability into people's everyday lives through transportation. So I thought that was really interesting. There's also a lot of new technologies that seemed cool. So I thought that, green transportation is definitely something to be aware of.
There's so much more to come because you're just starting your sophomore year in college. But like, how did that interest in climate solutions how does it factor into like what you're doing now or where you want to go with your studies and with your career?
I chose the major of engineering because I like math and you can really be creative with it. I feel like after you learn the fundamental engineering skills, you can really apply that to anything. So I knew that I wanted to apply the critical thinking and the creativity towards helping the environment. So last semester, I actually researched with a professor and we looked at different types of green infrastructure. So we looked at buildings that had green roofs and also green walls and the different types of benefits that they would bring into the building for energy efficiency and also the surrounding community. And especially in cities, there's this effect called the urban heat island effect, where because it's really populated, there's a lot of concrete that absorbs heat, cities just heat up more. So we were looking at, if you put plants on the walls or the roof, that can help significantly cool down buildings. And then I also worked on a project where we mapped out all the trees on USC's campus. So we looked at the different types of trees, how much carbon they're intaking, and how much energy and money they're saving. So that is actually, we did that through the USC Sustainability Office. So they're putting that on their website. So we hope that that can be an interactive educational experience for incoming students to look at and be like, oh, we know that our USC campus we're doing efforts towards sustainability. So I think that can help inspire people towards also helping the environment.
Yeah, and a lot of people, I'm sure, might be watching and even thinking about, like, how do I learn from this or learn from even Jocelyn's example and find ways to effectively engage people with climate solutions and climate change? Do you have any any insight or any suggestions for how people can engage young people, especially in like working on and talking about climate solutions and climate change?
I actually attended a training in high school called Climate Reality, and that was created by Al Gore. So it's a free training that is held. Really, they have locations all throughout the world. The one I went to was in Pittsburgh, but I know they have them all throughout America and also internationally, so that they can really reach geographically diverse crowds. And it's a 3-day conference, I believe, and you get to talk with a bunch of cool people, learn their different perspectives. There's a lot of different panels that are really interesting where they bring in scientists, professors, and community leaders where they talk about certain issues. And there's I think there was one panel that talked about the science behind climate, which was really interesting. And then the headliner event was Al Gore came and he presented and he taught us how to present about the climate crisis. So he went through his presentation and then he was like, oh, this is how you would present about it. And we also got tips on public speaking, how to connect with others. I think a good way to connect with people is to start with a story, start from personal experience. That way you can really get them to empathize with you. And it's not just they're reading out of a textbook. It's something that is a personal experience, so they'll be more drawn towards it.
Yeah, and so there's a lot that comes to mind, and even just thinking about my own climate reality leadership training experience, because you mentioned 3 days, and there's a lot to learn and a lot of information, but something that you talked about, the power of stories and just learning how to convey that this is something that we should be talking about and focusing on, is so critical. And so I have to thank you even just for sharing your story.
Yeah, definitely. I would say stay open-minded, and because there's a lot of different things you can do to help out the environment and the community. You don't have to start with one large thing. You can start doing little things, and then little by little, all those little things will accumulate into a large impact or a large movement, because these movements couldn't start if that one person didn't want to join. It requires a lot of different people to join. So I'd say remember that you're not in it alone. There's always other people in your community that you can work with, and definitely try to take advantage of all the different opportunities that you may see from school or from your local community, because you will never know what interests you unless you try it out. So definitely keep an open mind. I know there's a lot of different organizations, at least where I'm from, Marin, we have a lot of different local organizations. I know there's one called 350 Marin, but honestly, I feel if you just Google environmental organizations near me, you maybe will find some cool ones that you can stay in contact with. And I know the Drawdown website has good resources too, has good data.
I was going to say, that's a great piece of advice, and kind of reminds me of what you shared about the Climate Reality Project. Beyond just the story, there's a theme there of finding a community and finding people to do it with. You don't need to address climate change alone. None of us alone will be able to solve climate change and global warming and reach the point of drawdown. So to find that community, and also to your point, kind of tying some of the things together that you said, to find a community that is also concerned about the issues that you're concerned about, which is probably your local community and people in a similar context, could be so helpful. But thanks so much for sharing this, and I will just hand it over to you. Any final words or anything that you would want to share with the audience watching?
You can do it. I feel if you're passionate about it and put your heart into it, you'll be able to achieve what you want. And honestly, whatever you do, the community would be so helpful that you're helping them out. So I think just do whatever you're passionate about, and along the way, you'll meet people who have similar interests, and then you guys can share your different perspectives and build off of each other's ideas. And then pretty soon you'll have just a community of environmental advocates that you can work together with. So I'd say enjoy the journey. It's been fun. I'm still in the journey and enjoying it.
Thank you so much, Jocelyn, for joining today's Project Drawdown Dialogue and for really helping answer this question of how to get young people to find their focus areas within climate solutions out of the 80 plus solutions that exist that Project Drawdown has listed in the Drawdown book, in the Drawdown review, and at drawdown.org/solutions. But now that we know how we could go about figuring out a solution to focus on, and now that we know how co-benefits could play a role and kind of shape our passion for this work when it comes to climate solutions, really bringing it close to home, now I think there's the question of what could educators do? How could educators take lessons from this dialogue and take lessons from the experience of these students at the School of Environmental Leadership to apply them to their own work and their own classrooms as we head back to school? Last but not least, coming up next, you'll hear from Taylor, who's nearing the end of her college journey, but already finding ways to think about the solutions and their co-benefits, from supporting other young people in reducing food waste, recycling, and composting, to prioritizing health and education solutions, and really reflecting on ways that her own education has set her up to really care about climate solutions and how some of the lessons from it can help others do the same.
I'm Taylor, and I'm originally from California, but I'm currently attending school in Berlin, Germany. I go to Bard College Berlin, and I guess I'm involved in two different projects. The first project I initiated by myself and also with another classmate of mine about a year ago, I want to say. Yeah, like August, exactly a year ago. And we had an idea because there wasn't a lot of opportunity in German schools for really like climate-based action, I would say. There was a big climate movement, Fridays for Future, that a lot of students were participating in, but there wasn't any really direct action that we saw in schools, because my friend, she was also German, so she kind of knew from experience what it was like to go to school in Germany. So what we did was we implemented an after-school program for high school students. So from, I think we had ages 16 to 17 pretty much. And I also attended Marincell. So what we did was kind of took what I learned from Marincell, which was project-based learning, and we brought it to the school and really wanted to provide the students with an opportunity to take initiative and change what they didn't like or they wanted to be more sustainable in their school. So they chose zero waste. So we then made this whole plan and got approval to implement a waste program because they didn't have recycling bins or compost in most of the classrooms and in the outside area. So we got approval from the principal and everything. They prepared a presentation, and then sadly COVID has impacted the project because we haven't been able to meet since then because of restrictions in German schools. But that was the first initiative I was involved in. And then the second initiative I'm involved in is internship, and it's with an organization called Sowing New Futures. And basically what Sowing New Futures does is it empowers women to be financially stable. And a lot of women also that are in the program were a part of human trafficking. And it gives them an opportunity to leave that area of work and go to a sustainable fair wage job. And the cool part about the nonprofit is also that everything that the women make, so they're all women artisans, and everything they make is sustainable. So in India, there's two different areas we work in India and Uganda. And in India, the women are upcycling fabric that was left over from the textile industry in India. And they're making kimonos, scrunchies, just a bunch of different clothing items. And then in Uganda, they're turning newspapers into paper beads and making jewelry, and really beautiful. So I've been running social media and kind of doing some nonprofit management, learning about nonprofit management through that opportunity.
Beyond climate solutions, what are you passionate about and interested in?
Yeah. So I actually didn't go in the direction at all to study environmental science or environmental policy or anything in the environmental field. I actually chose to study ethics and politics, and my main focus is actually human rights and specifically linguistic rights. I'm currently writing my thesis on that. And yeah, besides that, like, I love the ocean, I love surfing, I love scuba diving. I love anything that's involved around the ocean.
Yeah, it's so interesting for me to hear just what you're interested in and more of who you are as a human beyond the projects, because I think one thing that I hope that this interview and the storytelling that we do at Project Drawdown gets across is that climate solutions could really be for anyone. It's not just people who are studying engineering or science or the environment, but people of a wide range of interests and backgrounds are who this is for. And so it's really interesting to hear more about who you are. But to take a step back, I'd love to know what motivated you or what sparked your climate journey, your climate solutions journey.
Yeah, so I guess it all started for me in my first year of high school. In 8th grade, Marin School of Environmental Leadership, they came to present at our middle school about the opportunity to join their school, which is like a magnet school inside of Terra Linda High School. So I really had no interest in the environment prior to that. Of course, we learned about it in school, but I just said, why not? I should apply. I had friends applying. And then once I entered that school, that's really when like my passion for environmental activism and to implement my own change kind of started, because we were learning so much. We learned so much, and we also actually got to like implement already and empower ourselves already, even as young high schoolers, to like enact change. You know, we got to run our own sustainable business. We got to work on what are called lead projects. So we had semester focused projects where we worked the whole semester long on some different theme. I worked in zero waste, I think bay water quality, a lot of different projects. So that really sparked my interest. And then once I exited high school, I would say that's when I really started to follow my own passions about what I wanted to implement change, and kind of pursued then different projects I could be involved in to kind of, I don't know, put my foot in like environmental activism and environmental change.
Yeah, you mentioned your friends, and I think that one thing that's so important for people to realize is the influence that they have to influence the behaviors of others and the actions of others. Like seeing your friends take on this path also, you're like, oh, well, I could do it too. But I think beyond that, I'm curious if, you know, if we're thinking about any educators who might be watching, like, do you have any advice for them or anything you've learned about like how they could work to engage more young people, more students to care about climate change and climate solutions?
It all has to be student based and student led, because, you know, once the students really show their passion for what they want to follow, then that's when they'll actually pursue it and like implement it. When it's something that you're assigned, then it's way less of a motivation. So I think like that's what MCEL is, and that's what I kind of, my greatest takeaway is like, when you're trying to lead a project, you really want people who are motivated in that direction, and you want them to be like leading it with passion so that they can, you know, really find the motivation to follow through with that project.
Yeah, I love this, and I love that we're talking about this, because I think that a lot of people could see like, well, we obviously want to engage younger people in climate solutions and in climate change, but they're not always sure how. And it's one thing I know is that MCEL and the work that's happened within the School of Environmental Leadership has really been helpful to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Could you just like talk more about some of the projects?
The four big things we learn, or the four big like qualities that we gain that they focus on in like Marin Seller's cell, like School of Environmental Leadership, is like the 4 C's it's called. So it's critical thinking, creativity, communication, and collaboration. And like from my experiences, it was working together as a team with my classmates on a specific topic where we had kind of the reins to do whatever we wanted with that project. Like I remember in the Bay water quality, or we were supposed to test the Bay water quality or focus on researching Bay water quality in the Bay Area. And we were in 9th grade. So of course we were very young, and we had these big ideas like, let's buy a boat, we can go out, we can test the water quality, things that like we didn't understand, that it wasn't very practical, but we still could pursue that idea. And we didn't say, no, that's not practical. They were just like, yeah, check it out and see if that's actually something you could do and look into it. And I think that's what really helped all of us in my class, like all of their passions for environmental leadership and environmental change, is because we got to think big. Every project we did, we thought huge, and we came up with huge lists of all the ideas that we had. So it was very student-led, student-based, and that really made a difference. And all different parts of the student got to be shown in these projects.
Yeah, and I think that everything you're saying is so powerful, especially when it's coupled with guardrails of like the science and the data, and knowing what solutions are effective and what types of action needs to be taken. So in the context of Project Drawdown, for instance, I know that there are a lot of teachers and students who look to the Drawdown book, which came out in 2017, the Drawdown Review, which came out last year, which is really an update on the book and everything that was in there. And then even more recently, something called Climate Solutions 101, a video series talking through climate solutions. And so it's really interesting what happens when you know what action needs to be taken, but then you pair that with like giving people ownership over their learning experience, which is really powerful. Is there any kind of advice that you might have from your experience, again, of what's worked for you, or anything else you'd want to share with the audience just when it comes to how we could help more people learn and embrace this important topic?
I don't know if I have advice for educators, because I feel like that's kind of difficult, but I definitely have advice to like everyone. For me, is like, it starts with the smallest amount of change, and you can just change your lifestyle. You don't have to do some huge project, but you can change your lifestyle or talk to people. Like, to me, that's the biggest thing. Talk to people about their lives, their lifestyle, what they're doing that's sustainable and not sustainable. And then that will inspire them to change their lifestyle. Like, I went plant-based after I learned what how bad the animal agriculture was. And I have talked to so many people about it that have inspired them to then look into, okay, what am I putting into my body and how does that impact the environment? And then it kind of creates a domino effect. So it's like really even like the smallest changes can lead to a really big difference. And that's like, I think, especially with our generation, what should be instilled in us, because we're kind of inheriting this earth that is really in a poor condition. And there needs to be changes, and it starts with our lifestyle and the smallest things that we do every day.
One final question I have for you, Taylor, is just thinking about climate solutions and, of course, knowing how important they are. Thinking about your path and where you've been, what do you see your vision for your future being, and what role do climate solutions play in that?
My biggest focus, or the biggest solution I'm focused on, is education, because I believe that with education, we can solve a lot of the world's problems. And I mean, I've already been involved in it, but I would love to pursue it even further, maybe as a further career. I don't know exactly yet what it will look like, but I think that really education is one of the most important solutions, because then people start to realize, okay, there's more I can do. There's more change I can create.
Just as a follow-up to that, one pattern I've noticed is not only with your interview, but with just others and talking with other young people, is that there's a lot of interest in justice and equity and doing this as safely, as equitably as possible. So why do you think that is?
Honestly, I think it's the times. I think especially the recent events in not only the United States, but in the world has led young people, especially from my perspective, to be more political. And I think, at least what I feel and what I notice with my friends, is the biggest focus is kind of creating a more equitable world, because we see, the imbalances and we see the injustices. And I think, at least for me, that's right now the biggest thing we need to change, because it all connects. Injustice connects to climate change. We see kind of this broken earth and broken society that we have that needs to be changed.
Yeah, and it's definitely also something that we will have to live with if we don't do something about it. And so It's good that we're doing something about it. But one final question, one really final question I have for you is there anything else you want to share, or any other message you would like to share with whoever is watching?
You can be making a difference every day, and you can put your attention and your passions towards making a difference with the climate and also with the world. And I think there's a lot to change, and there's a lot of people who are passionate about change needed. So I think we're all going in a good direction. And I don't know, I just hope people realize that they themselves can also be the change, or at least have a little bit of change that they can implement.
Thank you so much, Taylor. And thank you to Jocelyn and Rita for all of your insight. I also want to thank everyone who's tuned in and watched this first Project Drawdown Dialogue to really learn from people who are bringing climate solutions to life one way or the other. If there's one thing that really resonates with me from the conversation with Taylor and overall this dialogue, it's just the importance of really trusting young people to be part of the solutions, and to letting young people lead when it comes to implementing projects and taking steps to reach drawdown. Young people have a huge stake when it comes to climate change and climate solutions, especially because this is going to be the world that the youngest people inherit and have to deal with. These are all problems that they're looking at facing. And as has come up in some of the conversations so far, including Harita's, it's just this reality that it's not that far away, as we're seeing from the wildfires and other natural disasters that are only intensifying with the impacts of climate change. Because of that, I hope you, as a community member, as an educator, as someone who has influence over others, could really think about what are ways that you could involve people in talking about and in doing something they care about when it comes to climate change and global warming. There's no one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to climate solutions. And I hope that out of this dialogue, from the examples that you heard today, you could start to think about ways that you could really allow community members to guide and lead their own climate solutions journeys. One way that I would recommend for educators, for community groups, for anyone really to get the next step on the climate solutions journey is to check out Climate Solutions 101 presented by Project Drawdown. Climate Solutions 101 is the world's first major educational effort focused solely on climate solutions. It includes 6 units hosted by our executive director, Dr. John Foley. And it also includes 10 expert conversations with people focused on various areas when it comes to the solutions. I hope that through this conversation, through checking out Climate Solutions 101 and through visiting drawdown.org and checking out our solutions, that you too can see that the power is yours and that you can do something when it comes to climate change and global warming. There's no one-size-fits-all approach. Everyone has some way of plugging in. And I really look forward to seeing what your climate solutions journey looks like. Thanks again for joining today.